Welcome to the ASEAN Wong podcast, where we will be bringing you expert insights and regional perspectives on Southeast Asia and Indo-Pacific geopolitics and geoeconomics. I'm your host, Dr. Prashant Paramerswaran, founder of ASEAN Wong. And if you haven't already, do subscribe to the ASEAN Wong platform at www.aseanwong.com so you don't miss our posts and episodes. Our guest today, for our inaugural podcast episode, we're very pleased to have Professor Amitav Acharya, who is a distinguished professor and UNESCO chair at American University. In addition to his extensive academic work, he has also had several practitioner-based roles as well, including advising ASEAN officials and leaders who have sought his insights, including the past ASEAN Secretary General Surin Pitsuwan. He has written books on topics, as we've discussed extensively on ASEAN Wong, including Indonesia's role in Southeast Asia, ASEAN, Southeast Asia, a multiplex world order, and Myanmar, which is one of the flashpoints that we talk about on Southeast Asia frequently today. We begin our discussion with key geopolitical and geoeconomic questions, including on major power competition and minilateralism. Make sure you listen to the full episode to hear more about specific and future-looking insights on ASEAN and the Indo-Pacific. So thank you again, Professor Acharya, for joining us on our inaugural ASEAN Wong podcast episode. Let's start, if we could, on the notion of the Indo-Pacific, which you've written extensively about. We've seen a proliferation of strategies on the Indo-Pacific, not just from the usual suspects like India, Japan, Australia, but also a number of European countries and even Canada, for example. ASEAN has come up with its own notion of an Indo-Pacific strategy, and that's been, some would argue, a belated effort to sort of recapture centrality or institutional centrality within ASEAN. As we zoom out a little bit, as somebody who's written about regionalism from a variety of perspectives, including Asia, Asia-Pacific, East Asia, where do you see the Indo-Pacific aspect of this conversation moving forward? And how do you understand the relevance of this? And what are some of its advantages and perhaps limitations in that regard?
Thank you, Prashant. Thank you for inviting me to your first ASEAN Wong podcast. I'm a big fan of ASEAN Wong, so I'm very happy to be here. Now, about your question, let's start by noting that Indo-Pacific is a new concept. There are a lot of people who will tell you that the Germans have talked about it, Nehru had talked about it, but really the concept has not been in the policy domain until maybe a decade ago, maybe late 2000s, but really in the 2010s, that decade, that it really became a recognizable name in the policy world and even in the academic world. So in that sense, like all the regions in the world, including Southeast Asia, including Asia or Asia Pacific, this term has to evolve. It has to be accepted. It has to have traction among not only the policymakers, but also the people and the academics and people. And I don't think it has had that yet. The Chinese don't like the term. And of course, it has a lot more popularity in India and increasingly US and Japan and Australia. But none of these are ASEAN members. But that doesn't mean it will not gain popularity. And this is why we should talk about how the Indo-Pacific came about, or how is it different from other terms like East Asia and Asia Pacific, which have not gone away, by the way. I think the Indo-Pacific is a very strategic notion. While the term Asia Pacific was basically built on economic interdependence of the 70s and 80s and 90s, but Indo-Pacific doesn't really reflect any such interdependence. And India, one of the key players in the Indo-Pacific, is not really linked to East Asia in the way, say, Indonesia is. Similarly, the term Asia was a political and cultural term. And because there was this Pan-Asianism before and after the Second World War, And it was built around that notion of pan-nationalism, cultural, civilizational affinity among Asian countries. That's why people like Jawaharlal Nehru of India or Sun Yat-sen of China and Okakura Rajo of Japan, they talked about Asia. But Indo-Pacific is not a cultural concept. So it doesn't have the same kind of cultural gravitas as Asia has. It might get it, but so this concept has a long way to go. It was coined for a very strategic purpose, basically to draw attention to the rise of China, the sharing of security concerns around the rise of China. And also it was meant to bring India in. India was not really a big player in the Asia-Pacific notion because it was not economically really integrated into Asia-Pacific. And Indo-Pacific puts India in the center stage. It gives Australia a very prominent role. And it also serves the strategic purpose of the United States and its allies or partners like Japan, Australia, and in the case of being a partner, India increasingly moving toward the US. So in that sense, like many regions, there is no guarantee that this concept will be around for the next 20 years. It might become something else. Regions have a way of rising and falling, just like empires. And we'll have to wait and see whether Indo-Pacific will survive. But in the meantime, even as a narrow strategic concept, it has made a difference. And the big difference is that because of the support and the promotion of this concept by the United States, by Australia, by Japan, by India, it sort of kind of sidelines ASEAN. As you know, you mentioned I have my work on Asia-Pacific regionalism or Asian regionalism. A key element, actually the defining element of any previous regional concept was the centrality of Southeast Asia.